welcome to Anomalies Boss Review. Today we're going to talk about how I am essentially going to eventually, in time, maybe not tomorrow, but in the next maybe 4 or 5 years, review every boss in WoW, put them on a chart, finally figure out what is the best boss. And today, I'd like to review that system, why I want to do it, what I hope to accomplish, and maybe a little bit about the thought process behind how this is all going to work. So, what are my goals for this rank? Right, like I'm throwing a pitch here. I want to provide solid framework to be used for any boss across any era of WoW. I mean, we have got bosses, as simple as like, I don't know, Major Domo, or actually kind of complex for what it is. Like you got, I don't know, like Gar or Magmadar, like some very, very simple bosses, all the way up to like Kill Jaden, the second iteration, or even something like, the current boss today, like Siren and Athreus, which is like absolutely tons of stuff going on. I want to be able to quantitatively rank the bosses based on a standard set of criteria. Again, trying to build this criteria, quantitatively ranking them. I'll be completely honest with you, most of this is subjective, but I'm going to put numbers down in categories, and there's going to be a quantitative ranking of those things. It's going to be exciting. And yeah, exactly. Eventually answer this question. What was the best WoW ever? What was the best boss ever in World of Warcraft or WoW? And the data to back that up, not just kind of, oh yeah, no, that sounds like a good one. Lich King, best boss ever. We're putting the numbers down. And finally, we're gonna have some fun doing it. I mean, like I said, this is all my opinion, but I'm gonna put numbers down, and you can't look. Once numbers go on the paper, you can't erase those. It's like in pen. So how are we gonna do it, right? I mentioned I have a system or a framework at least, and we'll see if this works. I mean, let's be honest with this. I'll probably make it about 10 videos in or 10 bosses in, maybe change it, maybe tweak it. But ultimately, the idea is simple. Have some categories, put some numbers down, and basically add them up. Highest number wins, right? So we're going to break it down to two main categories, right? You have mechanics and difficulty on one side and style and look and feel on the other. The idea here is that the perfect boss needs to have the mechanics to back up the look, back up how epic it feels, right? Because epicness isn't just like, oh man, that was really hard to do. Epicness is like the boss looks cool, the room looks cool, like the mechanics are sweet. So the idea, we're going to meld them together, right? We're going to push them together. So what is under mechanics and difficulty? We've got execution difficulty. I'll explain all these a little bit later. We'll just go through them quick here. We got strategy complexity or uniqueness. We got key mechanics, basically key things in the fight. And then we have unique interactions. And we'll explain. On the style and look and feel side, we got boss area details. We've got lore or background story. I mean, like the Lich King is kind of a big deal. Magmadar. A boss model and look, like how cool was the model, right? And then finally, memorability, right? Can you remember all these years later, what did that boss do? So, what is under mechanics and difficulty? Execution difficulty. Essentially how hard it was, right? Like more difficult fights in terms of execution are given a higher score. And again, this is on the execution side. The idea is this is just a hard mechanical fight. It took a lot out of you as a raider to complete, right? And we'll probably do this in kind of various ways where like maybe DPS or a certain set of roles in it was very difficult. And we'll sort of try and spread that out. But the idea is that essentially everybody has a difficult role. Higher the score, the more difficult there are across all the roles, the higher that score will end up being, right? Again, we use the Magmadar example. Execution difficulty is probably, that's going to be a 1. Whenever I get to that boss, it's going to be a 1, right? But on the second hand, when you look at something like maybe Argus or even something such as like Siegecrafter, right? Those are higher. Those are like 8s, they're 9s, 10s, right? Then we have strategy, complexity, and uniqueness. So this one is really all about the strategy itself, right? So the execution is on one end, actually doing the fight. The strategy is how interesting, how hard was it to do, how easy was it, right? And sometimes these will go hand in hand, right? Like maybe the anima boss in Throne of Thunder, right? But sometimes they might be very different, right? Where you have, I don't know, something like, Guarm, which was from an execution perspective, very difficult. The strategy was very easy, right? A lot of patchwork style fights are going to end up this way. I can't think of a fight off the top of my head that ends up in the reverse way, but in any event, We'll see that. Well, maybe we'll find one, right? Key mechanics. This is an interesting one. This is basically a call out to something unique that was in the fight, right? It could be the first time this was used, or it could be the 10th times it was used, but is a key mechanic or key boss ability, or even key part of the strategy, right? That shows up and is like, wow, this is cool, right? Like I think, Thogar in terms of like the trains just jumps to mind as like, wow, it's a really cool ability, right? Um, so this score is really just to sort of see like, hey, where are those interesting mechanics that fit themselves into a fight? Let's give those bosses a higher score, right? Because again, the best boss in WoW should do something unique, should do something new, should also be difficult, should have a fun strategy, right? That's what we're getting at. We're sort of building on top of these. And the idea is these are different, right? Like you could have a very fun boss from a strategy perspective that literally is like the same reused abilities from 4 expansions, right? It's key mechanics aren't anything new. They just maybe put them together in a unique way, right? Maybe that could up the score. We'll see. Then we have unique interactions. And this again is like where you have maybe a specific class or a specific set of abilities that uniquely interact with the player, right? So like to me, and maybe this kind of goes hand in hand with key mechanics a little bit, but unique interactions where you have maybe a specific class or specific thing that happens within the fight that is very unique to that fight. It only occurs maybe once or twice ever, right? Like cube clicking on Magtheridon, very, very unique for the time it was done. But you also have certain abilities that are fun, like in Tuma Sargeras, Rogue soaked everything, right? So like the idea there is like, oh man, it's fun that Rogue soak it. Maybe like the first boss it happens on, it's super high, but like by the 10th, maybe the score kind of diminishes, right? So that's the idea, is like unique interactions. I mean, like the first time you see a secret phase of a certain boss, like Gold Dan, right, is a really cool one. And things like that where you start to get into those areas. That's sort of the main idea here, right? With unique interaction. Then we get into the style and look and feel, right? So we have a couple categories here. We have four again because we wanted. So we have boss area, the details around it, right? How does the arena that you fight a boss in look? Is it interesting? Is it fun? Right? Do you want to go back there? Do you want to go to the Fireland ever again? Because you like lava and rock. Fireland is going to get a very low score here across. I'm literally just heads up. Fire and rocks, not exactly the most exciting thing in the world. So, next up, lore and backstory. Again, this is the story of the boss, right? It doesn't have to be a major lore character, but maybe they have a very interesting role inside of that dungeon, inside of that raid. So again, could be just in place of the war, in place of the raid, could be in the larger Warcraft universe, right? Like lore backstory for some of the major lore characters we killed is definitely going to be higher. However, there might be some surprises. I know literally zero about the lore, but I'm actually going to figure this one out. So we'll give these guys good scores for sure. Then we have the boss look and model. Basically, how cool does it look? The model doesn't have to be unique, but the way that potentially that the model interacts and the spells and the abilities, right? This all kind of goes into that boss look. Does it fit the arena very well, right? Like Zakul, I think actually ends up being fairly highly scored here, but will be very lowly scored everywhere else because it's a terrible trash fight. However, the look and feel, the model, it's not a unique model, right? It's not new. It might have some unique features on it, but it's generally sort of a faceless one. But the model, the way the area kind of fits in, and sort of the tentacles, and I thought it looked cool. And finally, memorability. So how memorable was the fight, right? Can you remember it years later or months later, or what was happening in each one of them, right? And this score is probably going to be the most objective score we have here. However, I think that I hopefully will do a good idea about, for me personally, trying to give like a fair share or fair understanding of some of the fights, right? I think memorability will be very clear. And again, this is in the positive light, right? If you negatively remember a fight because of bugs or other issues, the score is going to go. But if you remember it years later and it was cool, you had fun, higher scores. So now that I've sort of given a bit of an overview of the categories, how are we going to do this? Right, the scoring side of things. So each subcategory, those basically 8, 4 on one side, 4 on the other side, we're going to score 1 to 10. Very easy, very simple. 1 being a low score, 10 being a high score, yada, yada, yada. You get it, right? Then we're going to total them all up, and the biggest number wins. Pretty simple, right? So I did an example. I actually don't know why I did an example. It's super, super easy to understand, but here's a table. It's an example. It gives you an idea of like, hey, for execution strategy, key mechanics, unique interactions, you can have one score. And then for style, look and feel, boss area, lore, boss use, memorability, so you have another score. And then you add them up and you get the final score, right? So boss, awesome boss number 234, while I mean it crushed boss number 8 in terms of both categories. It was very, very close in terms of mechanics and difficulty. With maybe boss number 8 had something really unique, or it did have something really unique was happening. The rest of it was sort of middling across the board. And then style, look and feel, the lore behind boss 3234 was fucking carried it, right? The arena, the lore, maybe the model and the memorability was like really low, but it still carried right there. And that's sort of how we're gonna do it. So that's the idea. That's what we're going for. Eventually, the goal is to rank everything. Maybe put in a nice little table, and then you can filter things. We'll see. But yeah, that's the idea. So hope you enjoyed the overview. And check the channel, look for other links. I'll probably put links somewhere in this area, maybe, or over here. Probably not over here because that's off screen. Probably on the screen to other videos. So thank you very much, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day. And let the rankings begin. Sorry about that.